Okay, good afternoon, welcome. This is something of a test run to have a look at both the lighting in this room and just to demonstrate how we use Q&A with the boys to deconstruct elements of the text to explicitly teach writing in our school when we're writing about, in this case, English. Here we're going to be looking at Romeo and Juliet. This is around Act 3 or Act 4, Scene 4, one of the two, something like that. It's been a while. Where the friar admonishes Romeo for his lack of emotional resilience and fortitude in the aftermath of his banishment from Verona. It's a critical part of the text. When we go into a text like Romeo and Juliet, especially working with boys, there are some key ideas that we want to explore there, and there's a key way in which we explore the text with the boys, and a focus there is about representations of masculinity. At least at Bally, we look at representations of masculinity, temperance, resilience, things like that. And this is a really critical part in that whole conversation in the text, particularly in the way in which it ties into some of Shakespeare's important ideas about stoicism and resilience and such like that. So it's an important idea of the text. So if students are going to be writing paragraphs about this, they need to be drawing on specific pieces of representation. So, for example, this is one of those lines, and it's a cracker. The boys love it. So what we do is we put it out on the board like this. And what you'll see there is a series of verbs that have been written around the outside. This comes in a journey after we've looked at videos, for example. We might have watched the Zeffirelli film with Olivia Hussey. We might have read through the text, explained a lot of those nuances. And then we need to take that back to the board and show the boards how it's written. And the board is really a key protagonist in this whole process. I know that English teachers are really well advanced at standing in front of class and talking, having a chat, having a few jokes, dropping a few personal anecdotes, which I like to do myself. But it's really important that we take everything back to the board so that we can model explicitly how words go together, as well as introduce formal language and a formal register. Because if you don't do that, the board's going to fall into what we often call a playground kind of dialect, a vernacular of the playground, which is very informal, it's very colloquial, and it's inappropriate for the formal writing of an essay in HSC. Okay, so the other part that I want to make very clear is that you, as a teacher, we go into this classroom with a clear understanding of where we want to take the boys in this text explicitly in terms of what we want them to write about. So while there's a vast array of verbs which we can use to talk about this, and you can talk about this in a multitudinous variety of ways. What I'd like to talk about here, the boys, is how the friar is using this simile to criticise, what is inferring and suggesting here, and another implication that's going on in the text. There is a world of complex verbs you can use and model, and that's actually a really exciting process. The boys built up a really important bank over time. Offers insight into, there's some great phrases you can model there. But we're going to work with these, okay? So let's have a look at the first part. So one of the first things we do is okay, boys, what technique is that? Okay, so it's obviously simile, so we write that down there. Simile. And how we write that out is going to be a really important process. Okay, so let's have a look at what he's criticising. Now, I've often said to teachers in the initial part of this process, it's okay to have a piece of paper in your hand about where you want to go with this. As a reminder, the more you do that, you'll be more familiar you will be with the language that you specifically want to elicit from the boys, so you won't necessarily have to do that. So who is the character that he's criticising? Is he criticising Julia or Romeo? Yep, Romeo. Okay, great. So he criticises Romeo. And there is an element that we're focusing on here. It's probably... It's that element where he sits there and having a cry when things go wrong. So there's two words that we wanted to use to talk about. The first one would be self-what? It might start with self, has an I, good. Self-indulgent, thanks very much, mate, at the back, awesome. Self-indulgent. There's a word starting with really feeling sorry for yourself, starts with P. And it often describes a sort of a sulky, pouty kind of temperament. P-E-T, yeah, good, petulance. Up the back there, thanks very much, fantastic. The boys up the back. So he's really criticising Romeo's self-indulgent petulance here. There's another adjective we can put in there. It's a self-indulgent. Let's enrich this. Is he an old man? No, he's not a young man. There's that period of sort of that teenage years that he's going through, starts with A. When we talk about that period of emotional turmoil, yes, adolescence, boy down the front, right? How do we spell that? Thank you. Adolescent petulance. How do you spell petulance again? Good, thank you. So there we go to the process of using specific Q&A to elicit particular words and model them. And these are the words that we want the boys to be using in their written responses. It's like I often say, you don't go into a mathematics classroom and do Pythagoras' theory and then say, go home, come up with your own theory. This is the language that we're eliciting and we're working and we're introducing the boys. This is the language that we want them to use. I think it's largely ridiculous that there is an idea in English that, okay, the English teachers, they talk about text in a particular way. Go home and write that in your own words. Okay, what's the point of being in the classroom? Ridiculous. Okay, moving on from that. I won't sort of pontificate too much. Okay, so suggesting and inferring. Okay, what is one of the suggestions that he's making here? Is he saying to Romeo that he minimises his suffering and pain, or is it the opposite? It's the opposite. So it suggests that we can use he because we've introduced Romeo there. What's the word starting with to make a bit larger? Okay, exaggerate. Typical spelling point. I can't even remember it. So, he exaggerates, his suffering. So, for example, then, he exaggerates his suffering, and what does he ignore? What are the good? Is there anything else that's happening here? He's pouting upon his fortune and his love. Are they bad things? No, they're good things. So, exaggerates his fortune and exaggerates his suffering and ignores his what? Good fortune. Okay, thank you. So the idea is that you're using particular questions you're asking, and you're not just writing them on the board for the kids, you're asking them to help you write that with you. I had some great mathematics teachers in my time, and it's very much the way in which they did maths. What's the next word? What's the next word? What's the next number? Okay, there is also an implication here on a more deeply psychological level that we can talk about. So here, there is an implication that he has kind of a what's the word that's not emotional? It means that we tend to think or feel about things in a particular way, starting with P. Okay, psychological. Now, there's a word starting with P that means that you're inclined to do something. It's a sophisticated word. Most of you probably are unfamiliar with the word. Starts off with P. Does anyone happen to know what that is? No? Yes, over there, good, great. Predilection. I don't know how you know that, but anyway, awesome. Predilection, a psychological predilection for. Now, predilection, it's a beautiful word. Use that in the HSC. You're going to squeeze a lot of marks out of the marker. Yes, it's pretentious, but that's important. English writing in a sophisticated register is about introducing and using that form of language in a more dramatic way. So what does he have? Romeo has a psychological predilection for. Does he have a psychological predilection for optimism? No. He has psychological predilection for, let's say, negativity. And there's lots of really exciting and interesting ways in which you can deconstruct Romeo's psychology in this text. He admonishes his predilection to, catastrophize. It does offer insight into Romeo's, self-indulgent, petulant character. Different ways in which you can talk about that, all using particular verb stems. But again, it's very important that you model those verb stems and then you model about how to write those on the board. So then you've got all the material that you need the boys to be using to create one of those beautiful sentences. There is a template that we used at the beginning. Obviously, this changes over time, but in Year 8, which is actually when we do this content, we introduce them and we ask them to be rigorous in their use of that template until they achieve mastery. And once they do that, then they're able to go and vary it. So here, the template that we have here is that the speakers, or it's the authors. We actually use mostly the authors. But in this case, it could be Romeo's, it could even be Shakespeare's, depending. And that's actually really important as well, because you'll find that when you do HSC marking, it's really important for students to be able to talk about what is the author, how is the author using language, not just what happens in a text, but how the author is using language to achieve a particular end. So actually modelling for the boys right? The author's use of, for example, really helps inject the author into your analysis. So the author's use, here we go, of simile. In this occasion, I'll probably use Romeo or whatever, of simile. And then we work that. Just a key point for English teachers, you need to work that in a way that works syntactically. Now, we have a general rule, and it's in our scaffold, it's this does that, comma, doing that. Okay, one of the critical points, there's only one S. So everything else is going to be an ing. If you want to throw something on the beginning, it would be doing that, comma, this does that, doing that. So the idea, we don't get complex with the language, it's an S. One S verb, and they can put a little circle around it just to count that off if they want. And that really helps them identify the subject, key verb, and all the other extraneous verbs around that. Here, this is the subject. The author's use of simile. That's us. Talking about subject, verb, and object, that's us. It's the author's use of simile. But we also need to work that in syntactically. So, is he crying? Is the friar crying here when you know? No, he is. With a simile, it's good to use, for example, I would say suggesting, because it makes grammatical sense. So, suggesting Romeo is acting. ... like it, and there you get, and that's just the language you can work that into the sentence so that it's smoother. So using our scaffold, we have the author's use of simile, comma, that's our first part, the author's use of simile, suggesting Romeo is acting like a misbehaved and southern wench. Then we go into the verb, criticises, there's our S, that becomes an ing, and that becomes an ing. And then the boys put the sentence together using that scaffold. So what they're going to come up with is, now if it's early on in their tuition, we might just say, okay, there it is, good, write it out. And what the boys were able to do is use each of these separate Lego parts and put those together. And they can put that sentence together and demonstrate their understanding of those structures. Otherwise, you would model it for them quite a lot until it becomes something that they're incredibly bored by. It's important to reach that stage of boredom. Once they reach that stage of boredom, it means they're no longer challenged by it and they can start to move on. But then, oh my God, not deconstruction, I'm sick of it, is really important because that repetition is critical to learning. Okay, don't just do it once and let them go. You've got to model it, model it, model it, model it, model it. Okay. So the way that they'd be writing the sentence out would be using that scaffold. The author's use of simile, comma, suggesting Romeo is acting like a misbehaved and southern wench. Criticises Romeo's self-indulgent adolescent petulance, comma, suggesting he exaggerates his suffering, ignores his good fortune, and implying he has a psychological predilection for negativity. Bang! I mean, that's awesome. I mean, if year 8 is going to be putting that sentence together, that's fantastic. And that's generally what they're going to be doing over the course of the year. So what you've done there is you've introduced particular language that you want to use, sophisticated language, new terminology. You've reused some of the verbs that you want them to get in the habit of using, and you've provided them all the tools that they need to put together that complex sentence. What they can do alternatively is, at a certain level of expertise, instead of starting the sentence with the author's use of simile, they can change that. So we can start with this gerund form over here that you see. So we might say, we can even start with that. You can start with that. You can start with that, or you can start with that. And that adds variety. So, for example, if you start with this one, suggesting Romeo is acting like a misbehaved and sullen wench, bang, comma, Romeo's use of simile, Romeo's use of simile, that criticises Romeo's self-indulgent adolescence, suggesting and implying. Okay, great. Or you could say, hey, let's start with that one, and then do that one, and that one, and that one, and that. So you've got implying Romeo has a psychological predilection for negativity. The author's use of simile, suggesting Romeo is acting da-da-da, criticises this, suggesting this. So what they're able to do there is put together these amazing multi-clause sentences using an S and an ing. Now, obviously, there are variations to that, and they learn variations as they go on, particularly as they start to stack techniques upon each other. And there's a whole lot of modulations that you can teach. But this is generally the starting point that we want them to start working with. And if that's too many clauses, you can differentiate to a particular audience. Yours is used as simile, just pop that in there, criticise us, full stop. You're also going to be able to challenge your students to put together far more complex sentences along those lines. So that's pretty much how we use Q&A to elicit those kinds of questions. And I do want to just say at the end of this is a really exciting process, that part right there, because irrespective of what subject you're in, whether it's in English, whether it's in history, whether it's in science, whatever the case may be, and this process is applicable to all of those learning areas, this is the opportunity where you get to do the captain my captain thing, get really excited and talk about your text. This is the moment where you're standing there with your kids, talking like a nerd about the stuff that you love, and you're able to ask those questions. The boys engage or the students engage. They help build it with you. It's a collective process of minds working together to achieve an end. They learn from the process. It's really exciting. You get to nerd it up. They get to nerd it up. It's fantastic. And everyone walks out of that class going, bang, when I walked in, I couldn't do that. And when I walked out of there, look at the sentence that I can put together. And you go home and you read that sentence to your parents, or you have a look at the kind of sentences they're writing in the HSC, which are exactly the same. And at that point, the students go, I can do this subject. Let's go. And from there, the only way is up. Okay, you beauty. Thanks, Rama.